Societies respond by adapting, and that is happening today on the education front across America. All levels of learning have been disrupted, with millions of students now taking classes online from home. We'll be hosting 2 sessions today. This first one focuses on learning in the K-12 education band, and at 1:30 p.m., after you have a run or a cup of coffee or some celery or something good, at 1:30 p.m. we're going to be back here with a focus on higher education. The pandemic is also exposing deep inequities on the education front. Not all students have access to computers and Wi-Fi in their homes. And in a strange twist, in-person learning is accessible mostly to those who are able to afford private schools. Today we're going to ask the hard questions, like how can the unevenness in school funding across America finally be addressed, and whether teachers have received sufficient training to adapt to a more wired ecosystem. And do we have the tools to bridge the schoolwork and homework gap? We're going to be talking a lot about the homework gap in this first hour. We're also delighted to have a fantastic lineup of guests to help with just that: educators, teachers, administrators, parents, and some government officials. Before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at @TheHillEvents using the hashtag #TheHillEd. ED. I like those short hashtags. Good job, team. We are broadcasting live and we'll be taking your questions throughout the program. As with any live stream, you could experience occasional trouble with the video. Refreshing the page, I always laugh at this, refreshing the page should in most cases fix the problem, rarely for me. To kick off the program, I'm joined by Sal Khan, an early pioneer of distance learning. I had the pleasure of interviewing him when the Khan Academy was a much smaller deal. He's still around. He's the founder and CEO of Khan Academy, a nonprofit that provides a collection of online learning tools and video classes for kids for free. Khan Academy came to life 14 years ago after Sal tutored his cousins over video, and now he's helping close the learning gap literally for millions of people across the world. After schools started closing this spring, usage of Khan Academy's free online tools went up 300%. Sal, it's great to see you again. I have always been astounded by the success of the Khan Academy. And so let me just ask you right now, what does your dashboard look like in terms of the COVID crisis and how people are now building you and what you do in more than ever in these times?
Yeah, it was exactly as you just described. You know, and when we entered into, actually it was February that we first caught wind that we were going to be very relevant. We started seeing traffic spike in Asia, and I remember getting a letter from a teacher in South Korea saying how Khan Academy was what was keeping them going through school closures. And at the time, it seemed wild that a country would close down its schools physically because of the virus. But then only a few weeks later in early March, when it became clearer and clearer that it was going to happen in the United States, that's when we kind of started running a bit of a war room effort. We obviously started to stress test our infrastructure in case we saw traffic increase. Obviously, we ended up seeing a massive traffic increase. But then we started organizing webinars for parents and teachers, putting out lesson plans, putting out schedules for families just to understand what a structured day could look like in this, whatever you want to call it, homeschooling, quarantine schooling. And then as we kind of got into that second half of March, as you just described, we saw traffic get to almost 300% of normal. In normal school days, we were seeing about 30 million learning minutes per day. During the spring, we were seeing 85 million learning minutes per day. Teacher and parent registrations were 10 to 20x of normal. Student registrations were 5 to 10x of normal. And then when it was clear that this was going to be longer, I remember in the early days, it feels like a lifetime ago, people were saying, oh, maybe this is just through spring break. But when it became clear that this was going to be for sure through the end of the school year and likely through the summer and maybe even back to school, which we now know it did happen. It is happening through back to school. That's when we started putting out even more resources that we thought would be helpful. You know, we've always talked a lot about this notion that in any classroom, kids show up on day one with a huge number of gaps, a big variance in preparedness. Because of the COVID slide, this was going to be even more pronounced, even if we had a normal back to school. So we started putting together things like our Get Ready for Grade Level courses that allow students and teachers and parents to assess whether a student is, first of all, ready for grade level, but if they aren't, it's actionable. It allows them to remediate their gaps, fill in their foundations for pre-grade level work, and then they can work on grade level at their own time and pace. But the general principle here is, Khan Academy, especially in math, although, we have other resources in test prep and science and early learning. We have math, reading, writing, social emotional learning. it's been kind of the go-to for, I would say, the daily practice of distance learning these days. It's been a
Right.
kind of, especially in a math combination of Khan Academy and some form of live video conference.
Look, I'm always impressed, and I just want to be blunt. The reason, I encouraged my team to put this forum together today, not to say, okay, what's the future of education, but how can education be disrupted to be better? And why I was thrilled that you were on, we sat down years ago with David Cohen of Comcast, and I asked you at that time if you may have stumbled across a leveler for children, a leveler and a step up for students. We talk a lot about students that do not have the opportunity that wealthy kids or privileged communities have, and whether or not you've got something. So I'm just wondering, when you look at the districts that partner with Khan Academy, they outperform the districts that aren't partnered with it. Is there a point where flowing to what you do becomes a kind of leveler, and has been the disruptor all along that K through 12 kids have needed?
It's our hope. The whole education system, there's a lot of complexities going on, but what we've always preached and tried to build forward towards as a nonprofit is not only giving world-class material to learners of all ages around the world, from pre-K through the core of college and core academic subjects, but allowing them to access it in a way that in some ways helps us rethink the experience, allows them to learn at their own pace, fill in any gaps that they might have, do what's often known as mastery learning, where you get the opportunity and the incentive to fill in any gaps you have, make sure you learn the material before moving on. And our belief, and these aren't new ideas. These ideas predated Khan Academy. They've been taught in ed schools for decades. Teachers have been told for decades, hey, differentiate instruction, try to meet students where they are. But the realistic situation is, if you're a teacher in a classroom of 30, your kids are all over the place. That some of them have major gaps for many grade levels. Sometimes the standardized tests from the previous year tell you that they have major gaps. But in a traditional model without any support, it's very hard for that teacher to meet every student where they are. And so our goal has always been, can we provide those tools to the teacher so that students can learn at their own time and pace, fill in gaps as necessary. Teachers are armed with more data so that when kids come into the classroom, they can do more focused interventions and really meet them where they are. I think, we've been on this journey for about 10 plus years. I started tutoring my cousins back in 2004. 2009, 2010 was when I started doing this as kind of a real thing, and we got our first funding. I think the journey has been, there's been a lot of intellectual agreement with everything I just said. I think educators almost universally believe this. But when it comes to implementation, it can sometimes, there's just traditional inertias. How does this work with the grading system? I, as the educator, have been told I need to cover the 60 standards in 180 days. If I let all my students learn at their own time and pace, maybe I won't get the coverage, so to speak. We've had a very coverage-focused education system. And so it does take a leap of faith, but you're absolutely right. We're seeing in classrooms, even if folks are able to put in 45 minutes a week of personalized practice, they're growing anywhere from 10 to 30% more than expected. So you can imagine if they're able to do 30, 40 minutes a day of personalized practice, which is completely reasonable. COVID, I think, is for sure an accelerator here, because these ideas of personalized practice, learning not being bound by time or space, these are necessities under COVID. It's unfortunately, for better or for worse, it's thrown a lot of educators into the deep end of the pool on adopting technology. And, I think pre-COVID, any form of technology adoption was a new thing to have to get, and teachers were already stretched thin. So I have a lot of empathy on, hey, the guy from Khan Academy says, here's a new way of doing things. But with COVID, they're having to rethink everything. And Khan Academy, I'd like to believe, is one of the easier things to adopt in this new era. So I do think as we get out of this, these are going to be much, much more mainstream ideas. We're going to have a generation of teachers who are going to be used to this, a generation of students, and a generation of families.
Well, there's so many different areas I want to go on this, and I want to remind our viewers that the services you provide are free. I also know that when you triple the number of people on your website, that costs the host of that website, you, Khan Academy, a ton of more money. So I hope you're getting the resources that you need to continue doing what you do. But let me ask you something. Today we're going to be talking a lot about the digital divide, about students that do not have easy access to broadband. And I know you signed the Connect All Students letter and said we need to do. I hate this subject. I hate the topic because I've been discussing it with people since 1999, and it just doesn't seem to move. What are your insights, if you have any, on those students and families desperate to have the services you provide, but yet there's this gap between their connection and how they can use it. I know stories even in Appalachia of people who are on Khan Academy, but they have to go through weird ways to get access to broadband to get on Khan Academy's site.
Yeah, and first of all, on the fundraising side, yes, it's good. It's always good. I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't remind folks as the head of a nonprofit that we definitely need donations. KhanAcademy.org/donate makes a huge difference, especially now because of COVID. We're running at a bit of a deficit and a larger deficit for next year. But to answer your question, yeah, this is, for things like Khan Academy and everything else to operate right now, it's predicated on having digital access. Even pre-COVID, at-home internet access is a lifeline, not only to educational opportunities, but for family economic opportunities, just being plugged in. I think, in the U.S., we've done a decent job, not a perfect job, closing the digital divide in schools over the last 10 years. I remember 10 years ago when I went to many schools, the laptop or the Chromebook, whatever, device access was not where it needed to be. The internet access wasn't where it needed to be. Because of programs like E-Rate, we've gotten a lot better, still not perfect. The big gap, and I think this is where your frustration has been, is at home, where that really has not improved too dramatically. And as we know, going into COVID in the U.S., roughly 30% of the population did not have adequate internet access at home, adequate device access, and now all of a sudden the whole family is going to have to do distance learning, work from home, if they're lucky to do enough to do work from home. And so even one device and internet connection might not be sufficient given the circumstances. The silver lining, I would say, is that we've seen heroic efforts on the parts of philanthropists and municipalities and districts to get access to devices in homes. In New York City, public schools distributed close to 300,000 laptops and worked with the telecom carriers to get free internet access. LA did something similar with 200,000 devices. Miami-Dade, similar 200,000 devices. So we've been seeing these heroic efforts. The issue is, even where that has happened, it still hasn't solved the problem. They're still seeing 10-15% of the kids just being disengaged. Sometimes they're just not activating these offerings. Sometimes they might have, but the theories, and some of them are, most of this is anecdotal evidence, is that there's multiple folks in a house that need access. The dad needs to look for a job, mom needs to do something else on it, and so the kid can't spend 6 hours doing distance learning or whatever. I think 6 hours is a little too much on distance learning, but can't spend 3 hours on distance learning every day. So I think this is a major issue. The one thing I throw out to folks is we're doing $1 trillion stimulus here, $1 trillion stimulus there. The cost of getting everyone at-home internet access and reasonable devices is in the, my estimate is on the order of about $10 billion, which is a lot of money just taken by itself, but it's less than 1% of the amount that we've already spent on stimulus. And if you think about one thing that is going to empower families, not just academically, not just economically, but also, frankly, from a mental health point of view, it's that.
So everybody can tweet Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi and say for a modest $10 billion in a $1 trillion deal, you can do that. I think that's a tweetable moment, and then link, Khan Academy, Sal Khan has got his Twitter up there. So we're taking questions from the audience, and we have one from Nancy Mesmer for you. Nancy?
I'm a retired K-20 educator, mostly in the public sector, now working on lifelong learning opportunities with Lions Clubs International, with folks around the world. I'd like us to consider, in this time of crisis and change, how do we tailor educational delivery methods and formats to individual learners, thinking of their learning styles and all the needs that we've collaboratively defined.
So, Sal, that's the first pillar of the Khan Academy. So can you give a quick snapshot of that pillar about personalized learning?
Yeah, so there's two aspects of that. One is the personalized learning aspect, and that's what Khan Academy does. Students can go, work at their own time and pace, master concepts, and then teachers and parents can be informed where they are, so that when they get together with teachers or parents, either on video conference and distance learning, or ideally in the classroom eventually, they can do more focused interventions to really meet kids where they are. And that intervention might be academic, it might be social emotional, it might be motivation, just to make sure that the student stays on track on learning. in this world of distance learning, I think there's another layer that we can really reimagine, which is, I think the first wave of distance learning, classrooms have just transplanted what they were doing in a physical environment onto Zoom or Google Meet. And if you think about it, the traditional 1 hour classes, these were really a byproduct of logistics. You can't have kids changing classes every 20 minutes. It would just be disruptive. It takes time for kids to put their bags down, unpack, et cetera, et cetera. But now we have the opportunity of reimagining that. And we're seeing teachers do really creative things. Instead of doing 1 hour with 30 kids, they do 6 10-minute sessions with 5 kids each. They could run office hours. So I think this is a time where we can really break. There's a lot of disadvantages from distance learning. It's suboptimal for the most part, but there are some advantages around flexibility and being able to play around with time. And there are some efficiencies on, I guess you could say, context switching costs that typically occur in a physical environment.
Well, I love I would love to kind of go on for hours with you, and so there's so many applicability possibilities for what you do. And again, he didn't ask me to do this, but support Khan Academy if you can, because it's great. But Sal Khan, founder of the Khan Academy, thank you so much for joining us today and launching today's program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.